Hello, everyone, and welcome to this side event jointly hosted by Wenger Law and the Nordic Council of Ministers. My name is Cathrine Wenger. I'm a climate lawyer and managing partner of Wenger Law, and today we will be launching a report on financing solutions and sources for responding to loss and damage that was commissioned by the NCM. Amid the speedy adoption of the Loss and Damage Fund and more than $500 million pledged so far, we are off to a positive start. However, more is needed. In our study, we have investigated financing options in markets and mechanisms, taxation and levies, insurance, and the private sector to enhance finance for loss and damage. I am proud to announce that with us today, we have ministerial and high-level speakers and panelists to help us move the discourse even further and unpack the potential of these innovative financing sources and solutions. Without further ado, please welcome our first keynote speaker, Mr. Ole Thonke, the Undersecretary for Development Policy in Denmark. In his more than 2 decades working for the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he has served as ambassador for the Royal Danish Embassy in Kenya, Pakistan, and Bolivia, in which the consequences of climate change were high on the ambassadorial agenda. He has also in-depth experience with development cooperation and climate financing, and is a Knight of the Order of Dannebrog. Please welcome.
Thank you so much, Cathrine. First of all, for inviting me here. It's really great to be here at this event and see so many of you gathered to discuss this really important topic. And I also need to congratulate the Nordic Council of Ministers, because they are the ones paying for this show, or at least they paid for the report. And again, which I think is great, that the Nordic countries are really throwing themselves into this discussion. Also because, I mean, we've been having climate finance as a discussion at COPs and at a global level for decades now. I actually wrote my master thesis on how to attract more private financing to developing countries, and that's a few years ago. And the challenge is that we are not there, and we really need to look beyond what we have right now of solutions to move this agenda forward. A perfect example of this is the recent emission gap report that I'm actually witnessing later today, the launch of that. But the figures in that is that the cost of adaptation, they have estimated to around $250 to $387 billion per year. And in the 55 most vulnerable countries, the issue of loss and damage are costing them around $500 billion in the last 2 decades. Alone in 2022, $109 billion will be lost in those countries because of the changing climate. And yes, it is estimated, and I will not go into how they calculated that, but still it gives an idea of the magnitude of the challenge that we are facing. And also because most of the climate finance that we have actually been able to raise these past 10 years are mainly going to the developed countries, the OECD countries, whereas the flows to the emerging markets are much more difficult to get going. And if you then compare to how much ODA do we have available, the figures from last year said that actually there was a record in 2022 of global ODA of a bit more than $200 billion US. But comparing that with what we are facing in terms of the needs of financing, there's no way our public ODA financing can take us there. So that's why this has been an ongoing topic on the COPs, and why COP27, they decided to, quote, identify an expanding the sources of funding, and they also recognize that we need a wide variety of sources, including innovative measures. So again, just to come back to this report that will be discussed very soon, this is really, really good timing, because this is on the top of the political agenda and will be in the years to come. The study covers all the different variety of financing. We're talking about public financing, private financing, how to catalyze guarantees, blended finance, green or catastrophe bonds that are out there, carbon trading, loan swaps, etc., etc. And then it also touches upon a very important theme that has been discussed over and over again: international levies on, could be, for instance, airplane tickets or air fuel or shipping, which has been discussed in the IMO. And that is something, because Denmark, we are a proud shipping nation, and we have been really actively engaged in the IMO negotiations on this topic. How can we have a levy for international shipping that can either green the shipping sector, or that could even contribute to international funds such as the Loss and Damage Fund. And there's a lot of international initiatives that are pushing this agenda and make it gain a lot of traction these days. Lately in Paris, it was on the agenda on the new Global Financing Pact. There's a consortium led by, I believe, one of the panelists, Benito, and the late Samil Hook, that promotes international climate solidarity levying. I was at the Africa Climate Summit in September this year, where those of you who read the declaration, one of the most important things in that declaration, in my opinion, was their push for international levies or taxes, either on carbon or shipping or airplanes, etc. So there's a lot of momentum now for this agenda and political push that we need to think in this direction. On top of this agenda, just a couple of examples of how Denmark and how we try to work on this, and how to really be a bit innovative in how we work. We have just launched a new guarantee scheme by Denmark with $285 million. We are working very closely with Sweden to really push green financing. We have just today actually launched a blended finance instrument that we work together with the US and the other Nordic countries. And the first transaction of that has actually already been undertaken, of $1 billion. And then finally, we are also working together with Global Shield, where I participated at an event yesterday, which I believe actually has a lot of potential also, because it's all a matter of making an insurance scheme at regional basis to spread out the risk and have diverse countries in it, so that when the catastrophe hits, then there will be an insurance company that can pay. A challenge is that the reinsuring companies behind all of that, they are increasing the premium, because they have also listened to all the scientists who says that we will see more and more of these events, and therefore, of course, it has to be a business for them. So there will be some challenge in that moving forward. But in closing, I really want to thank you, Cathrine, for all the hard work you have done, of course, together with all your colleagues and the great team behind you. And I really hope that this report can spur some political debate on this topic and move it forward, because I believe this will be a political debate in the years to come, in the COPs to come. So we haven't seen the last thing of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ole Thonke, for your very inspiring speech and insightful comments. I think, luckily, we need more ODA, and Ole has already actually highlighted some of the key findings of the report in regards to taxation of carbon and shipping, and how we can go about doing that. And I'm also happy to hear about the newly launched guarantee and the blended finance. Thank you so much again. And now, please welcome our second keynote speaker, Mr. Mattias Frumerie, Sweden's climate ambassador and head of delegation for the UNFCCC. He is engaged in the transition to climate-smart societies globally and climate diplomacy to increase ambition in implementing the Paris Agreement. He has more than 20 years' experience in working as a diplomat in the Swedish Foreign Service, as well as EU advisor at the Office of the Swedish Prime Minister. In addition to postings in Budapest and Brussels, Mr. Frumerie has worked on issues related to Europe and the EU, Africa and the US, as well as managed teams on EU single market, strategic communications and planning. Please welcome Mattias.
Thank you so much for that trip down memory lane as well, in terms of my CV. Apologies for running slightly late. So good to be here in our neighboring, I think we have the Swedish pavilion just next door. So I'm trying not to speak too loud in order sort of to being too loud in relation to our Swedish neighbors here. But thanks so much for organizing, hosting this event. As you know, the issue of loss and damage has been rising on the agenda in terms of the negotiations for the past couple of years. We are now, I think you have already acknowledged, I suppose, at the outset of this session, also the historic decision which has been taken already at the first day of this COP. And I think thanks to Heike and many others who were working hard in the transitional committee during the course of the year, we actually had a recommendation for a decision here at the COP. And indeed have been able to mobilize already quite substantial resources for the fund itself. Now, I think it's fair to say, though, that however much money that we are able to raise and mobilize at this session and going forward, what we're seeing is that the demand for finance for what we in this process call loss and damage will be increasing. And that is something which we as donors, of course, need to be considering how we can respond to. But it's also something which I believe that we as a global community here at the COPs need to consider how we can respond to even more effectively. Setting up the fund is, of course, one key element of that, and getting maybe a better understanding between ourselves also what we mean when we talk about loss and damage. I think that has been one part of the conversation during this past year, but also previously, and I think it will continue to be going forward. What is it that we mean when we talk about loss and damage? For example, in the Swedish system, we did an overview of funding which we have made available for what we within the Paris Agreement define as loss and damage. So building an Article 8, sort of going through the catalog, I think is sort of 7, 8, 9, 10 elements in Article 8 in terms of what Article 8 defines as loss and damage. We went through our funding systems, and during the period 2021 to 2023, we have been providing 9.5 billion Swedish krona for activities in that kind of area. Now, my CEDA colleagues are very clear to point out that this is not funding for loss and damage, because it's not 9.5 billion Swedish krona for loss and damage, but rather 9.5 billion which have been somewhere around sort of in for those kind of activities. And that in itself, I guess, also speaks to potential complexities in sort of defining what are these funding streams, and is there maybe a need also to define much more clearly, what is loss and damage funding? One option which I think has been discussed previously, I'm not sure what the status of that, we might hear that from the panel later, should there be a work within the OECD DAC, for example, to define even further or set a marker for what is loss and damage funding, something which has been considered. I'm not sure whether that is an idea to be pursued, but of course in some ways that would simplify the conversation in terms of how to make these kind of definitions. On the other hand, of course, setting those kind of definitions itself might take quite some time in order to arrive at those. And we would hear, I see Diann here as well, we've been having conversations within the Standing Committee on Finance where we have the issue of definition of climate finance, where we're hearing that the definitions that we're setting in the OECD DAC, for example, are not sort of universally decided. So it's something which we are, who are in the DAC, set for ourselves, so to speak. And in that sense, it's not something which we then automatically could expect that all countries, for example, within the UNFCCC process should buy into, which I think is a perfectly logical line of reasoning. And of course, then you could say, well, maybe we should have that conversation here within the UNFCCC, building on what we have defined in the OECD DAC. But of course, there are other potential reflections which might come into that conversation as well. So I think in whatever way we turn, there are always some other issues which might come into that kind of conversation on the definitions of loss and damage. And I think at the end, I would think that all of us here in this room, and hopefully, we as a global community, what we want to achieve is to make sure that, in this particular case, that the people who are affected by climate-related disasters are getting the kind of support that they need. We can spend hours and hours and years at these kind of meetings to venture into definitions, but at the end what we want to achieve is making sure that we're building more resilient societies. And that is the kind of approach that I hope that we from the Swedish side can be providing as well, in terms of working together with partner countries to build these more resilient societies, by working on capacity building, making sure that we're building regulatory environments, making sure that we have early warning systems available, both at the national, regional, local level, and making sure that we have these kind of capacities in place so that societies can meet whatever kind of challenges that come, be it because of climate change or others. Because, of course, these systems that we're building hopefully are not only sort of there to respond to the challenges of climate change, but also to wider potential challenges which countries may face. So again, thanks to the Nordic Council of Ministers for arranging this, for making the reports, which now the second time round, we had a report last year as well, and for diving into this particular topic and sort of looking into what are the potential ways to respond to loss and damage, and looking also into various sort of new forms of innovative finance. I think there will be other conversations also now during these 2 weeks on innovative finance more generally. And I think if there is an opportunity then for sort of the loss and damage community to link into that conversation on these various innovative finance flows, I think that could be also hopefully a good outcome from this COP meeting. I know, for example, my minister will be participating in conversation on the role of the aviation sector, for example, when it comes to innovative finance. I know Irish colleagues are also working on various suggestions when it comes to innovative finance. So there are, and I see Benito here being here as well, who has put forward a number of suggestions when it comes to innovative finance. So I think there are so many ideas around, and of course, all of us can be working with these in our various bilateral capacities, and let's see also what we then can arrive at jointly here at the COP meeting to take this issue forward in a way which then again creates more resilient societies globally. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mattias, for your valuable insights and your perspectives. I think you make some really good observations, and especially I was drawn to your observation about the end goal here, which is to build resilience to avert, minimize, and address loss and damage, which is why we are here in this room, and we should not forget that. And also how the importance of the loss and damage community to link into the wider discussion that is ongoing now at the COP, because we're 100,000 people here, and we're all striving to make a difference. So, you know, let's go. Thank you again. Moving forward to our next part of our event, please allow me to introduce one of the project team members, Mr. Sönke Kreft, who will be joining me in giving a very quick overview of the study we are launching today, and hopefully give you reason to read it. Mr. Kreft serves as the Deputy Head of the Risk and Adaptation Department at the United Nations University Institute of Environment and Human Society, and he also leads the work of the Munich Insurance Initiative, MCII. So the study is written by prominent experts in the field of climate change and loss and damage, and the authors are listed here, in addition to Sönke and myself, include Mr. Ralston Moore, Professor Christina Vogt, and Mr. Manuel Bueno. And the study gives a comprehensive assessment of 4 main areas, with 1 chapter for each. In short, there are varying degrees for potential for the many different sources and solutions. Several areas, for example, markets and mechanisms, have not previously been comprehensively assessed from a loss and damage lens. And the study brings to light new and interesting aspects. It looks into the Paris Agreement's Articles 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8, including the share of proceeds, which we all know very well. It also assesses the potential of the voluntary carbon market and the nascent nature credit market. One key opportunity, however, in this area is to establish a private sector mechanism for financing loss and damage tied to the Loss and Damage Fund. This mechanism can establish a framework stipulating the criteria for private sector financing of loss and damage, creating verified claims or tradable units that can be utilized by the private sector to showcase and report on the type and level of loss and damage benefits they are financing. Early movers in these mechanisms are likely to be state-owned enterprises and companies aiming to be climate champions. The study also reviews the taxation, which has already been highlighted as one of the key opportunities here, for example, in the shipping and aviation sector, as well as the fossil fuel industry. And several of the panel experts here today, as well as we've heard the keynote speakers, have in-depth knowledge of the air passenger levy and its potential for financing climate action. Here, however, I would like to highlight an opportunity that straddles the international sphere of taxation and could be made possible by bilateral agreements between ambitious countries, a levy on international aviation fuels. The time could be ripe to revisit regional or bilateral aviation agreements and put a price on carbon for international fuels that has historically been exempted due to ICAO guidelines that were agreed at the time when the aviation industry was in its early stages. To throw in a number, if all countries agree to a levy on international aviation fuel, the potential annual revenue is about 20 to 26 billion US dollars per year. Another opportunity that is just around the corner this next year is to encourage the IMO to set aside a small share of its revenues to the Loss and Damage Fund from its yet to be agreed measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping. Much in the same veins as the share of proceeds are working. A small percentage of the proceeds could give a stable revenue stream that, regardless of its size, I'm sure will be welcomed by the UNFCCC community.
Thank you. I quickly give you an overview about the insurance chapter. So basically, the insurance chapter discusses also the ambiguity to see insurance as a source to finance loss and damage or as an instrument to address loss and damage. We discussed the general role of insurance in loss and damage, be it from like assessing loss and damage, but also providing crucial incentives in loss and damage and addressing loss and damage. Then, of course, the payout function of insurance, clearly in the case of an insured loss and damage event, but also providing certainty for decision-making, de-risking productive activities as a function of insurance. The framing of the assignment was to focus really on the element of innovation. So the paper looks into some new products that could be discussed as part of the loss and damage funding arrangement or the loss and damage fund. They are on the left of the slides. In terms of take-home message, really the paper concludes that insurance is one color of the rainbow in addressing loss and damage. It's not, of course, not the full suit, both for the loss and damage fund and the funding arrangement. And it discusses concrete policy recommendation in the field of innovation, but also in system building to address loss and damage through insurance and the element of transparency and accountability.
Please, thank. I think, we also jumped ahead, but we also, of course, have an in-depth study of the private sector focus, which you can see here includes catastrophe bonds, debt swaps agreements, guarantees, result-based payments, risk pooling, front-loading, grant commitments, philanthropy, and credit card fees. And one of the two key findings from the report, of course there are many, is that there is a need for governments to incentivize private sector, and as we've heard from the keynote speaker Ole Thonke, that this is already ongoing. A lot of governments are already onto this field, and for example, debt swaps as well could be arranged for loss and damage activities, for assisted migration and development and contingency plans, and not to forget the option of enhancing philanthropy. They have a clear potential of being more prominent motivators in philanthropic donations, and this could also and to put loss and damage on their agenda could definitely be an opportunity that we shouldn't miss. And now, please let me introduce, for the next part of our session, the facilitator for the panel discussion, Frode Neergaard. Many of you already know Frode as the co-chair of the WIM Executive Committee for Loss and Damage and advisor to the transitional committee that successfully delivered this recommendation that made it possible to agree on the Loss and Damage Fund and funding arrangements a few days ago. Frode has more than 30 years of experience from climate and international development cooperation as a diplomat of Denmark's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he currently holds the position as chief advisor in the Department of Green Diplomacy and Climate, and is the lead climate negotiator with specific focus on loss and damage. Please, a warm welcome to Frode.
Thank you very much, Cathrine. I'm very honored to be here today and to be moderating this panel discussion on this really timely subject. I'd like to introduce the panel. We had hoped to have a couple of others in the panel, as you might see on the screen, but we all know how it is during a COP. There are negotiating obligations that sometimes collide with other things. But I'm still very, very honored also to now invite our two panelists, Jean-Christophe Donnellier and Heike Hein, to the stage here. And let me briefly introduce our two panelists to the podium. Dr. Heike Hein is Director for Climate, Energy and Environment and Commissioner for Climate Policy and Climate Finance at the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Ms. Hein? Lovely. And Ms. Hen has almost 30 years of experience in the sector. Since 2003, she has been working in BMZ in various positions as coordinator of German G8 Africa personnel representatives. But I want to highlight here also very much, Heike Hein, your role during the last year in the Transitional Committee on Loss and Damage. Then let me turn also to Diann Black-Layne. Good to have you. Ms. Diann Black-Layne is Antigua's and Barbuda's ambassador of climate change. She is currently the director of the Department of Environment of Antigua Barbuda. Since 2008, she's been the lead negotiator on climate change for Antigua Barbuda and one of the lead negotiators of AOSIS and G77 and China. Ms. Layne also served on the Transitional Committee for the Green Climate Fund and has been a board member of the DCF, and most recently, of course, also representing SIDS, the Small Island Development States, as a member of the Transitional Committee on Loss and Damage. And last but not least, Jean-Christophe Donnellier, my good friend. Good to have you. Jean-Christophe is currently chief of the internal audit of the French Treasury. He's been a French representative at the board of the Green Climate Fund, of which he has been co-chair from 2021 to 2023, I believe. And prior to that, you have served in various roles, I think at your embassy in London. You have been interministerial undersecretary in charge of technical cooperation, Minister Council for Economic and Financial Affairs at the French delegation to the OECD, and that's where we met 10 years ago, and also representing your country in the Development Assistance Committee and served as a co-chair of that committee. So welcome indeed. Let me try also now, within the limited time we have, to manage this time. I would like to kick off with a discussion on which you're welcome, just to give you immediate brief comments. And it's about what happened during the opening plenary here at the COP. And to some of us who've been in this, it was unprecedented. We had a decision taken at the first day of the COP on the work that you've been contributing with over the last year. Thanks to you, a proposal was tabled, and it was presented, and it was adopted. And not only that, on top of that, we had pledging of more than $1 billion US, if I believe correctly. Not yet. Well, getting there, hopefully. But at least it came in by the hundreds during the course of the plenary session. So my first opening question to you is, I would like to have your first brief and immediate reaction to this opening of the COP and the way in which the work that you had contributed to was then taken on at that first. Diann, please, you can start.
It was surreal. I don't think I've stopped smiling since. And then afterwards, it's like, what am I going to do for the other 2 weeks? I'm just like trying to, surface. I mean, and then what was great is that, and I know forming this fund was tough. And in the room, I made sure I was there. We saw persons from both developed and developing countries celebrating. And so it was good to see that all of us felt it was a win for all of us. So that was important to us as AOCs as well to see that Heike and everybody else on the committee felt good about it too.
Thank you. Over to you, Heike.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us and putting this topic on the agenda. And I must say, I very much enjoyed the Nordic cooperation also in the TC. So seeing also Georg and thinking about Jens and colleagues. And of course, the two of you. Okay, I think I was very anxious, very moved then when the decision came on substance of the decision, the fund finally. And also, I must admit, I was very anxious if we can pull off the matching with the UAE, because it was so exciting until the last second. And then after stopping smiling, I really sincerely still hope that this sign of trust and the sign that we can find solutions and can find compromise, that it really keeps us, or the ambition up for the important mitigation discussions we have, and of course on adaptation, because we know we need adaptation and mitigation if we want to reduce the losses and damages.
Yeah, Jean-Christophe.
Yes. Is it working? Yeah. Yeah. Well, 3 words: surprise, pride, and responsibilities. Surprise because. Okay.
Yeah, and keep it close.
That's the good cooperation between Germany and France during the whole debates on loss and damage. Yeah, surprised because not about the decision, even though it was not a given, but because of the huge round of applause which follows the adoption, which makes me realize even more how much this issue and the decision is of an existential importance for billions of people around the world. Pride, because yeah, it was not as well given to be able to get to that point. So yeah, I'm proud of being part with Diann and Eike, and I see Georg in the back there from Norway, part of this achievement. And the responsibilities, well, I think we have special responsibility as TC members to make sure that this decision will be implemented correctly, properly, and as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much, Jean-Christophe, and all the 3 of you, and thanks also to George there at the back. I think you have showed and helped demonstrate that multilateralism works actually, and I think that's something that's not just a small feat. So my next question relates to, I'm going back to COP27, and I recall also that my Undersecretary of State, Ole Thonke, you already referred to the decision at COP27 at which it was decided that in fact the Transitional Committee should consider identifying and expanding sources of funding, including working on widening the variety of sources and innovative sources of funding. So my question is, how successful have you been in this? I mean, what do you see has happened over the course of this year, and that has really contributed to delivering on this task that COP27 was given to, I believe, the Transitional Committee, but say the wider international community. So, Diann, would you like to start again?
Yeah, so for me personally, for Antigua and Barbuda, as well as maybe some AOSs, we know that public funding is not going to be enough. And we must move to get funding from other sources. I think the negotiation on that was a bit tough, but the decision, the way that is crafted, requires a lot of work by the board and whoever is the executive secretary of the fund. We have similar language to that in the Green Climate Fund to operationalize that, but that hasn't been done to date. So I think the next step, for at least for us in AOSIS, is to push for the full operationalization of that clause in the governance instrument.
Thank you, and I'm taking the same order over, so I get your response to my question.
Yeah,
how successful have you been?
I'm a bit afraid that I now got Jean-Christophe's mic, but it's working. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand side, not very successful because we have just like a couple of words on this. On the other hand, I think it played a role, an important role in the workshops, and also I think until the Paris summit a bit, it was very present in our discussions. And I think what we achieved, that there's broad agreement, I think, in the TC, and now in the decision that this is needed. And that, yes, public, but also private. And I think also what we achieved, listening to the authors, and thank you for the report, that on prearranged finance and funding arrangements, we had this kind of discussion about insurance, about contingency plans, about climate clauses in loans. So what can we do beforehand to set up financing in a more efficient and effective way? So this is also even mentioned with prearranged finance at one of the pages, I cannot remember. So we had this kind of discussion, but looking forward, and that will then be my last point, I think that we agreed that the decision will be taken outside the TC and outside the board on levies or taxes or whatever. But what we then also in the TC, but more importantly with the responsibility how the fund will be set up, have to do that it is delivering in an effective way so that it can attract also these innovative sources, and that from the impact side but also from the structure of the fund, it neither just limits what can come into the fund and is just not functioning. It has to function to attract also financing, and I think this is a responsibility we have to take seriously.
Thank you, Heike. Jean-Christophe.
Well, I wish it could take me 10 minutes to explain, but as you say, Heike, we didn't achieve a lot. What we did, it shows that it's important, nevertheless. Okay. Thank you, Heike.
Still German, French.
What we did is first, and you have said that, both of you, we popularized the idea that innovative sources have to be part of the sourcing and have to be part of the solution for a fund like the L&D fund. And second, we have made sure that whatever the institutional arrangement will be, whether it will still be the FIF after 4 years or not, this institutional arrangement will allow for the fund to be able to be sourced by any kind of innovative sources. So that's a very important decision, because when I was co-chairing the GCF, we realized that was not really the case, and that we have some institutional difficulties to get some kind of innovative sources of financing. So at least we did that. But going beyond that, maybe we could have done something, but I don't think so. I think it was not the proper forum to do that, and not the proper level of people. And this is why I put a lot of hope in the task force that President Ruto and President Macron did launch here, and I hope it will get momentum in the coming months to gather some other countries, and Barbados is already in, so that's an important first step, and I hope many will join and will make progress. The idea, the objective, is to make proposal to the COP 30. Actually, so we have 2 years to reflect on what kind of innovative sources could be used, and what kind of political difficulties has to be overcome to get to that point.
Thank you very much. I know we are running against time, but I have been told that we could maybe run over just about 5 minutes. So I would like to ask you a third and last question, because now we've seen this report, and it has laid out the options that were presented here, quite a number of potential instruments that could be explored, could be scaled up. I'd like to, and you have to be relatively short, and I know this is a big question, so it doesn't justify the time we have for it, but my question simply is, which of these examples that this study has included and that are also out there, which of these examples of innovative solutions to mobilizing finance do you see as the most promising, politically, technically, if you will, to really get traction on and scale up? So if you allow me to give you a very short time for this big question, again, Diann, please.
So all of these areas have already been taxed. And I think what would be innovative in the process is whether or not we can tax it and put it into an international fund. And I think that would be the challenge and will require, definitely the TC members didn't have that political capital to spend. They're thinking about it, and it has to be a political decision to be innovative in the way that what we do with the taxes and not collect them and then keep it, because we have seen that before, where countries would charge a climate tax on and then keep it, and did not remit enough money. They're depending on the Treasury to put that money into an international fund. So we're open to any of those ideas, but we have to make sure that the fund go into the international multilateral funds and available to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Heike, please.
Thank you. I can never contradict my minister, and in this case, I also don't want to. So from my perspective, a tax or levy linked to shipping, air, or fossil fuel production, anything that links emissions to then also payments is something that is understandable, I think, and I'm hopeful that we get there.
Jean-Christophe, please.
Well, I think this, whatever system we are going to develop, it has to be compliant with three principles. The first, and you mentioned it, Aker, it has to make the global tax system more fair in terms of, taxing carbon emission, and that's important that we target the sectors which are not enough taxed as far as carbon emission is concerned. And part of them, there are many of them. President Macron used to say, and he said it again 3 days ago, the global architecture is not pricing well enough the cost of climate. But I would suggest that the global tax system is not taxing enough some area as well. So it's not fair enough in terms. So that's the first characteristic. The second, it has to be very soft on the most vulnerable people. And if not, it has to be found some way of redistributing this amount of money to the most vulnerable country by country, actually. And third, it has to be at scale. And I don't know what kind of scale you were referring in your report, but the task force is looking for dozens of billion, not dozens of million, dozens of billion of dollars, something like 40, 50, 60, and maybe $100 billion. In that perspective, I would suggest that the easiest would be the aviation, just because it's already working in 20 plus countries, such as France and other Austria and others, probably in some Nordic country as well. Yeah. So, and that would be the easiest to me. The most rational to me would be the maritime shipping, because obviously they are not taxed enough in relation to the emission of carbon. But I don't want to exclude anyone, because I would be happy with anyone, actually.
Thank you. On that note, Jean-Christophe, I think we want to thank you very much, and I would love to have time for questions from the audience. I will make an exception, because I would like to, Benito, but you have 30 seconds, Benito. Because your work on this for decades, I think, but please, very, very briefly, Benito, we are about to close. You can shout.
Yeah. It works, okay. So, 30 very long seconds. I read the report with great interest, or lots of it, and two things which I would like to highlight, two things which I've been working on for some time. One is a share of proceeds in the voluntary carbon market, and the other one is these air ticket levies, container charges, these what we call climate solidarity levies, right? In terms of the voluntary carbon market, I think the report is a little bit unfair by saying
keep the mic closer to your mouth.
A little bit unfair by saying that the VCM is unlikely to be useful in direct funding for the loss and damage fund. Let's keep in mind Was it Energy Transition Accelerator of the US has a share of proceeds. The State Department is currently pushing for a share of proceeds in CORSIA. So if we do all these things, it's going to come. But the point is, whether it's adaptation or loss and damage, it's a new form, and we need to push it. Okay. We shouldn't pitch adaptation against loss and damage funding. That is.
Thank you, Benito. And you are having
one more second.
A side event on this on the 8th of December.
Yes. No, we have a side event on the climate solidarity levies, which were founded by me and Salim, the late Salim ul-Haq, and we have the flyers are there. And basically, it's how we can do the air ticket levies or the container charges, all that sort of stuff from bottom up, by countries getting together and doing it now, not waiting for an international agreement. That's the main thing. Thank you,
Benito. Thank you. And with that, Cathrine, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much. Please say a big thank you to the panel. Thank you so much for coming. And just be seated for a few seconds while I wrap this up. I think there have been said so many great things, and I just want to highlight one, which was said by Henke, that if we can find trust, solution, and compromise in loss and damage, I think we have gone a very, very long way since I was negotiating this in Paris in 2015. So if that is any hope for the future, I think we can see ahead for the next five to 10 years and see we don't even know where we will be. Finally, the study is available to download. You can find the flyers. Anna there has some flyers in which you can have direct access to the report. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me on the email you find there. And I'm very happy that the report is already giving a lot of enthusiasm. Thank you for the comment by Professor Benito Müller. And yeah, thank you so much for coming, everyone.